This episode of the AI XR podcast is brought to you by our friends at Zapper. If you're in the XR space, you've probably felt the pain of juggling different tools, vendors, and platforms just to get an AR or VR project off the ground. It's exhausting, and it can really slow you down. That's where Zapper comes in. They've built a complete suite of tools and creative services all under one roof to make creating immersive experiences not just possible, but practical. Their next gen 3D web tool, Mattercraft, is a game changer for building immersive experiences for headsets, smartphones, and AR, VR, and WebXR. It combines the power and flexibility of the 3JS rendering engine with a rich visual editor, making it super intuitive and easy for designers and developers to use. Put simply, you get the creative freedom of a powerful 3D engine with none of the headaches. So if you're ready to take your immersive projects to the next level, head over to zapper.com and see what they can do for you. Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlie Fink with Ted Shilowitz and Roni Abovitz for the AI XR podcast. Today is Friday, June 6th, 2025. Good morning, guys.
Good
Good
morning.
morning.
I'm coming to you live from Prague in Czechia. So it is 5 in the afternoon here and 8 in the morning on the West Coast. Of course, 11 in the morning on the East Coast. So, and everybody is probably listening to this over the weekend or next week. So, whatever day it is, good morning.
Well, that internet thing seems to be working out pretty good considering we're all in three different
Yeah,
time zones around the
I,
planet.
I know it's
I think
crazy.
there's
So,
some future for it, that internet thing.
Our guest today is Bryn Mooser. I don't know if you guys remember him as the founder of Riot, which was later sold to AOL Verizon. And subsequent to that, Bryn founded XTR, which is a documentary plus. And since then, he's founded Asteria Studio to combine AI with Hollywood filmmaking. His company has worked with Moon Valley, as you remember, we had their CEO on the show, and we were talking with him about making a clean model primarily from documentary content sourced by Bryn. So, looking forward to having a great conversation with him. He just announced a big show. I think we've got a lot to talk about there. Interesting news week. Not any big news financially, which we usually jump right on, but some really interesting news in other ways. For example, Meta, I don't know, we should call this the Meta podcast. But Meta is going to fully automate making ads for Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah.
And this is like a pretty big deal. It didn't, I don't know, make that much of an impact in media, but some people have really sat up and noticed.
Well, it's the AI layering of the world, right? Now you're talking about using these large language models to actually build content. And I mean, we know that, there's a I don't know if I'd say the word majority, but we know there's a lot of bot activity on platforms like X and Reddit and whatnot, right? That things are synthesized, that people have some belief are real. Now you're starting to remove the element of any sort of creative advertising model, promotional model around things. I think both TikTok and Instagram have been doing versions of this for some cycles now, and it's building more and more. Just because the cost of doing things and the volume you need to put out to get anyone's attention is quite dramatic. So it's not a surprise. It's just one more tick against humanity in the meta routine.
Well, with AI, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's full circle because think about how Facebook fought for ad dollars from Madison Avenue and the ad agencies. Now it's like, thank you for that. Now we're just going to obliterate all of you.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Shelley Palmer, our frequent guest, and one of the smartest guys I know, I have to say, in media and marketing, put out a really interesting post today where he says it's more than automation. It's Meta redefining the ad category. So, 97% of their $134 billion of 2024 revenue is tied to advertising. right? So what they're trying to do here is reduce the friction for advertisers and scale performance, which they've been doing using AI for quite a while now, and they used it to undo, of course, Apple's disable of the follow function. So I don't know. It sounds like a big deal. Um, I think we'll see it from Google. You mentioned TikTok. I think this is kind of the new trend because if the algorithm knows you and shows you content it knows you want, it can do the exact same thing with advertising.
Yeah,
So and make it on the fly.
yeah, yeah. Be very interesting.
So I think I agree that it is really important. We'll
But you
see
know where
how
that
it
leads?
works. But yeah,
It leads to not only personal advertising, but it's actually going to open up the door to personal media, right? Where the show you
yes,
want to watch, the game you want to play, the more it gets to know you, the more it's going to make the game you want and the shows you want to watch and more of those. And it's going to have this weird feedback loop. And like, that's the end of like Madison Avenue in Hollywood as you know it. It's not the end of creative
yes,
people, but
100%.
it has to change, right? You start with ads, but it's going to keep going. There's no way it doesn't keep going.
Yeah,
If you went back in time to sort of the beginnings of the popularization of media and the first television concepts with the Ed Sullivan Show and the Honeymooners and things like that, and then you flash forward to today, you take out the 75 years and you just show what today looks like versus the 50s and the 60s. People would just lose their minds. Like they wouldn't even understand how that even happened. That we live in this media landscape that is. I mean, we're doing it right now. We're in the midst of creating an audio-visual thing, with basically very little to no cost on computers that live in three disparate spaces around the world, and it has an audio-visual component that is arguably quite good, right? And there are millions and millions of people doing something like this right now in instant time, as well as people just doing communication that they call media, right? So layer that on top of everything else and now apply the AI algorithm model to that. The next 10 to 15 years are going to be a stunning change in what we call
yes,
media.
Do you know what
yes.
they've missed though? I think the mainstream press about this. Facebook has the audience. They understand what the audience likes, and now they're going to make ads that the audience likes that'll lead to television and films the audience likes. Hollywood doesn't have that. They have smart people who guess and are auteurs who think what the audience likes. Facebook's going to have like the hard data of you do this and I like it. Sort of like Netflix is kind of like that, but Facebook is more closed loop. Is
Yeah.
that going to make better media, or just like in a room of mirrors feeding people the most base things that just get them to keep addicted to it? Is it
Well,
going to lead
So
to
so there's
Kubrick
so
or
there's
lead
a
to
rumor going
garbage?
around Hollywood. There's a rumor going around Hollywood this week that Meta is trying to make deals with Disney. They made a deal with first of all an overall deal with James Cameron back in December to develop
Yeah.
content for them. Now they're trying to do things with Disney and A24 and some other companies for their next version of the Quest. I don't know if they're going to call it the Quest 4 or something else. And but I think it's more than that because Meta is a media company. I mean, I don't know why they haven't bought a studio. Apple bought MGM.
well,
Sony,
Amazon, you mean Amazon?
yeah. So Sony owns a studio too. So I don't know why Meta doesn't. Makes sense for them. They're an
Well,
advertising based business.
you also have to think about, philosophically, what we call traditional entertainment in our era is the elevation of the few, right? It's people toil, work their
Scarcity.
way, get a shot, smaller and smaller pyramid to the very little tiny bit at the top where you get your shot. And some of that content is remarkably great, right? Um, and then you have the opposite effect where everybody gets a shot and most of the content is completely sort of useless and unwatchable, right? So Meta is sort of playing both sides of the equation. They're pandering to the old model of elevate the tiny little bit and use that as a marketing tool. But in reality, the goal set is to have everybody proliferate media, right? Because that helps their cause. I don't think Jim Cameron really helps their cause. I think it just gives them a marketing tool.
Well, yeah, and I mean they need content. I mean
Yeah.
their content is not great. They bought all these content companies for the Quest. They've shut down half of them. Um, and there's 20 apps that are making money. Uh, so they need content because
Yeah.
those independent developers aren't going to supply it.
They're throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, to see what works. So is Apple, by the way. I mean, Apple.
By the way, I've said this. I've said this before. I think if Meta just walked away from the metaverse business, their stock would go up.
Mhm. Yeah,
All
no
right.
doubt.
So,
Are we
other
not going to talk
story.
about the big news of the week?
Go ahead.
Meltdown? You want to talk about the meltdown?
Of
Go
course,
ahead.
at least a minute or two. It's like watching, I don't know what it's like watching a Japanese monster movie with, but it also reminds me of like middle school when like the kids
Yeah.
would go to the back in the schoolyard and everybody would like fight, 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 and like the kids are sitting there in a ring, and and like Bobby's fighting Jeremy because Jeremy said something about Bobby's girlfriend. It's like you're in fifth grade, and I don't remember this. This is like flashbacks from middle school. That's what I'm remembering. I don't know what's your guys' feeling about this, because it couldn't happen to two nicer people, but
The visual comedy of it all is kind of what is hyper appealing to me. The idea that he gets the golden key, which is something out of like some really bad, B movie with a B cast. He has the black eye that apparently, his kid, his 5-year-old kid hit him in the eye. Who knows what that really is and what. So, and the whole thing is like, well, of course, when you put a bunch of clowns in, you're going to get a circus. So you've got the circus, right?
Well, I just watched The Mountainhead, which is HBO Max.
Oh, it's on my
It was
list to watch,
great.
yes.
You guys have to watch it. Everyone listening should watch it. It's like it really pokes fun, like Succession and Silicon Valley at the tech world, which I find incredibly humorous. But it's even more ridiculous than that show.
Well, reality is more ridiculous.
It's like I just watched and I was thinking, oh, who is who here? But this is more insane. Like you could not possibly write this one. It's just beyond crazy.
And 100% expected. Like, I often tell my friends, well, that the whole scenario is Trump is reverse Midas. Everybody that touches him in any way, shape, or form gets the reverse Midas effect. Things break down around those people. Even the most powerful, richest person on the planet gets the reverse Midas effect, right?
How fast did it degenerate? Like we're best friends forever, hugs,
yes,
to I'm taking away your SpaceX contracts. You're hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein on an island. It's like, whoa, oh my God, what happened, people? Like this is like, woo.
That escalated quickly.
Yeah.
Could you come back from that? Is that like, can they
yes,
make up?
with these guys, yes. I mean, how do you come back from, killing police officers in the Capitol as the Law and Order Party? How do you come back from that? Because you flood the zone with misinformation so that nobody knows what the truth is anymore. And that's how you win. You don't convince other people, you just confuse them all. So that
this is splitting tech bros versus MAGA. The crypto tech bros who love Elon versus MAGA. It's like a whole crazy. It's got to be roiling up all the tech world.
We'll see. We shall see.
Anyway, we just went down that. That was a dirty black hole to go on a Friday morning, but we just had to.
You
for
enjoyed
a second.
it. You enjoyed it.
Just for a second.
I could tell. For those of you watching on video, he enjoyed it.
I'm sorry. It's just so much humor.
Bryn
I don't
is
know
coming
what to say.
in. All right, let's talk about AI and movies.
There we go. Let's get back real.
Bryn,
well, no, welcome. Come on. What were you talking about before? It seemed like it was a fun topic.
Roni went down the dark hole of the two of the richest people in the world savaging each other on the social media platforms that they each respectively own.
The dark enlightenment is upon us.
E versus T, right?
Once about every 3 minutes of the show, the three of us turn into MSNBC hosts for
I know. Then we have to stop ourselves because it's
pull us back. Pull back
because it's not news to anybody. So
Bryn, it's just fun to talk about.
So do you have you guys met Ted or Roni before?
No, I mean I know you guys, but we haven't met yet. So great
to meet you, Bryn.
Nice to meet you.
I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Thank you.
It's first of all, Bryn and I have gotten to know each other. Nico Bonatzos introduced us a year ago, and so I've been following the development of his AI hybrid entertainment company, Asteria, and he's acquired a number of companies. He's as I said, we had the CEO of Moon Valley on. He was talking about how he had sourced his documentary material with your help to train the Moon Valley model to create AI content ethically with a clean model that is, that ensures that the output is been trained on licensed content. So, and actually, I have to say, just prepping for this episode and looking at your background in making ethical and social impact content and how that guided you to start XTR and win a bunch of awards because obviously you're very good at it. And also it's rare for filmmakers to have this level of entrepreneurship as well as storytelling ability. So I think you're a really rare cat and a great, great guest for us this week. So thank
Great.
you again for making the time for us.
Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here. I'm a big fan. And thanks for everything you guys do. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So first, you just announced your first, I guess, major project for Asteria, and you're working with Jaron Lanier. It's called Uncanny Valley. Is that it?
Yeah.
Tell us about
Uncanny
that.
Valley. Sure. So Jaron, Roni, you must know Jaron probably.
I do, and as soon as you say it's Jaron, I'm like, okay, everything perks up. What's going on there?
As many of us, I mean, look, for me, my background has always been at this intersection of media and technology, mostly because I'm interested in these moments where technology can sort of like democratize who can become storytellers or filmmakers or democratize some access in that way. My last company, Riot, was a VR and AR company that we sold to Verizon and AOL in 2016. So I spent a lot of time kind of, we quickly became like one of the leading content creators in VR and 360 video, which is why we sold there to Verizon and AOL. And, if you're in VR, then of course you're a fan and an admirer of Jaron. Jaron is one of the, early pioneers in VR, or some call him the creator of it. And I think that since then, his voice has been so important as really like an oracle and a truth teller from Silicon Valley. Or Santa Cruz, I should say, in kind of how we think about the future and the futurists in general. So Jaron is great friends with Natasha Leone, who's a partner at our studio, and Natasha and Jaron and Britt Marling have been working on this hybrid live action AI film that we're in pre-production on now called The Uncanny Valley.
And is it part documentary or is it? Tell us a little about the content.
No, at Asteria we're only doing, we still do documentaries through our documentary studio XTR, but most of what we're doing now is animation, fiction animation, and live action. So the film will be live action hybrid. So it's kind of like Matrix type story of some people who get lost in a video game, and the parts in the video game will be done in using different technologies, but a lot powered by AI, and then the other ones will be live action shot normally like you would an independent film.
Well, I also know that Jaron is sort of a conundrum in and of itself, because he has a long history as a harbinger of the dark side of technology, where technology takes us, and he was public very much in cycles around, these things are really dangerous if we let them go down this road. So it'll be very interesting to see how he adopts and utilizes the technology that I think he is genuinely very nervous and brings up really good points about. Like, he's his own sort of Black Mirror episode in and of himself as a personality, right?
Yeah,
so
he is. I mean,
to see what he does with this stuff.
And I think he's put out some of the most important writing so far on AI. There was an article he wrote about AI love in the New Yorker like a month ago. And about a year ago, he wrote an article that I think is still one of the seminal pieces called There Is No AI in the New Yorker, which kind of, I think, both grounds some of the hype and the kind of noise around the impending doom of AI, in some ways pointing out or asking the question, when you hear people who are really end of days on AI, it's worth asking, where are they coming from? Are they, and some of the times you'll find that those are the people who are running the biggest AI companies. So I think that part's interesting, but then also, thinking about, like the impact of what AI is going to do and how that, the hope of it is that it helps us solve some of the biggest problems in the world, but the existential crisis is that it might drive us closer to the edge in getting there, which is the great sort of irony about it.
Well, and
But I think
Natasha's
his voice is so important.
Yeah, and Natasha's an interesting artist to partner with because she's very organic. I actually met her. Oddly enough, I got a few years ago, the Variety Innovator Hall of Fame thing, and she was inducted
Amazing.
into the Variety Hall of Fame the same time. So we both gave speeches the same night, and our families were there. And she is
Wow.
just a wild card. Like, she's
Yeah.
fascinating, and her shows that she creates. She's a real auteur. She's a modern auteur.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a futurist,
Yeah.
and I think that she really, as she was working on Russian Doll, like really got into thinking about the future, and Ted Chiang and Jaron Lanier, and kind of started to gravitate towards these people who are thinking about things, and I think in the most interesting way. And so, I think she's been a partner of ours at Asteria in the company because I think that she. Like Jaron, I think understands or is interested in the complexities of AI, both in the challenges of it, in the threats of it, and also in the opportunities of it. And I think I think what's also, been exciting as she talks about it, or important for her, is that like, if this is coming, if this is so monumental, and I think it is in terms of what this is going to mean for our industry and for industries in general, like if this is this transformational. And we know, if we look in the past at what's happened with entertainment and technology, that it's inevitable, then artists should be at the table. Filmmakers should be at the table. We can't kind of let this technological revolution happen in entertainment to us from big tech. We sort of like, I think it's important that as filmmakers and artists, that we're helping driving it, because look, we saw what happened with the music industry, right? Or we saw what happened maybe in the kind of the worst parts of streaming. And so, from the very beginning, it's like, look, if we know that this is happening, like we should have some agency in it and be trying to build.
Yeah, I mean, I think for a
least.
lot of filmmakers, this is just another turn on the technology carousel, right?
Yes.
Like the idea of how we've used computer graphics, and that has upended various forms of creationism and become the mainstay of what visual effects films are now, is created with computers and humans. Now we're sort of taking the next ride, which is computers, humans, and large language models. And it's a fascinating time. And I think those artists, like the Russo brothers, also are leaning into this pretty heavily,
Yes.
right? Have for a long time. Most filmmakers choose not to expose their trickery. It goes all the way back to magic, right? Like,
Sure.
They don't want the audience to know what they're doing, but the YouTube crowd, the LinkedIn crowd, the sort of Instagram crowd actually does want people to know what they're doing. So it's kind of a fascinating time. You're right in the heart of it, doing creative content this way. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think that our journey really was sort of like rooted in that. I mean, first of all, if you look to the past in entertainment, these moments of technological change, you see kind of a pattern emerge, right? Which is like creatives and technical people coming together, even from the very early days, right? Like the Walt Disney famously was struggling with Fantasia and needed computer synthesizers, and met Hewlett and Packard, which was their first job, and put that company on the map, creating Silicon Valley, probably creating modern Hollywood and Disney. Then you see it happening with ILM and George Lucas, and you see it, of course, famously with Jobs and Lasseter with Pixar. And I think that like these moments, what is so interesting that emerges is like, when you can bring together people who are really trying to figure this out, like multidisciplinary people from different backgrounds, we're all trying to solve a kind of collective problem. Like, how are computers going to change graphics, right? Or how are models or new type of cameras or sound or color, right, going to change our industry? And so we're in this kind of moment now where I think the opportunity, and certainly what we're building at Asteria, is modeled on that, right? How do you bring together people who maybe are solving different parts of the puzzle all over the world, but it's lacking context, and bring them together into one space?
Roni, you probably have perspective on this, because this is part of what you're doing with Sun and Thunder. I mean, this is Roni's world as well. Like, he's deep in.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's super interesting, Bryn. I agree with everything you're saying. I guess a question for you is, what is your line between human and the machine? Like, where do we stop? Where does the machine end in terms of like this creative process? Because as Ted said, I've been like really deep in it, and it is kind of weird how you start to blend in with this stuff, and the line gets very blurry. But I'm wondering, like, do you have a line that says, okay, I want to have this many creative people plus this much tech, or are you going to be okay one day where somehow the machinery is just like outputting Academy Award-winning movies? You're like, okay, it's there. It's just doing it.
So I think it's the question of our generation, right? Which is in everything that
It's
we
a
do.
Friday.
Yeah.
Friday
I
morning.
mean, I've now switched over to like having ChatGPT be my therapist too, and it's so great. So like I've given over everything, and now I just to say like here's
Oh,
all my
by the
personal
way,
information to do this. Yes.
by doing that, Sam Altman knows every single thing about the darkest
By the
parts of
way,
the soul.
the
So
therapy is good. So that's a fine
But
trade-off.
by the
Okay.
way,
For
this is
now.
just a news tidbit that I didn't get a chance to throw in earlier. But Apple is racing into production with a movie about the Sam Altman board
Oh, I
dethroning
saw.
last
Yeah.
year, which is
Oh,
a
so
super
it's
topical.
like a new version of The Social Network when
You
Fincher
They're
had
made
trying
to
to
go
figure
there.
out who to cast as Mira Murati.
Okay,
Oh,
here's a
yeah.
question for Bryn. Sorry, we're
Okay, I'm
derailing you.
ready.
But
No,
why
I'm
don't you
ready.
make a movie about like the Sam, Elon, Trump triangle? Because it's like water. You know, there's an H2O. The Sam and Elon hate each other, but now
Right.
Trump and Elon hate each other, and Sam and Trump are best friends forever from a couple months ago. I mean, there's got to be a really good humorous movie there.
I guess I would argue that we're, whether we like it or not, living inside that movie, and we can't escape it. So we should all be making movies that are the opposite of that.
Right.
We're stuck inside of that simulation.
We are, yeah.
But I think that the question around like kind of where do those lines is an interesting one. And I would say that it's part of the distinction of kind of, or even one of the reasons that I built the company was as I started thinking about kind of like what was going to happen with AI, like about 2 years ago. Well, I'll back it up. When I saw a couple things, when I saw DALL-E come out, or when I guess saw Midjourney for the first time and saw that you could generate pictures, I think for me as a filmmaker, I was quite excited because I was like, if you can generate images, then you could make La Jetée. I don't know if you've seen La Jetée, the Chris Marker film, but it's like, was the basis for 12 Monkeys, inspiration for Star Wars. It's like just still images and a voiceover. And I was like, well, if you can make La Jetée, then you could make films in cinema. So I got excited about just like where this could go, because even just generating images meant that you could make a film if you were a filmmaker and if you were a writer and you had some taste and some style. And then I remember seeing like that Snapchat face filter where you became a Pixar character, and everybody was kind of going viral and people were sharing it around. It was cool, but I kept being like, man, I wonder if any of like my friends at Pixar who are building workflows have seen this or thought about would it be helpful inside their workflow. I don't know the answer, would it or not, but like, has anybody asked, right? And so I think I was inspired by like thinking about how the technology was lacking that piece of context, and if you could kind of create a group of these people coming together. And I met Hemant Taneja from General Catalyst, who also shared this idea that we could kind of build a studio of the future. And I went on the road and met every AI company. And I think that what I saw there, this is a long way of answering this question, but what I saw there was interesting, which was, oh my God, this technology is transformational and it's coming. And I don't think that our industry realizes what a big change is happening. I mean, I really do believe that AI is going to be in every part of the filmmaking process in the next couple of years, in the very near future. And two was they don't know how to make movies, and they don't know actually what we need in our industry to do that. And some of the big ones, I think when I would talk to them and meet with them, I don't even think that they care about our industry. They were building models for totally different things, and then all of a sudden they could output images and videos, and it was like, hey, look at this thing that nobody asked for, that nobody needed, and that wasn't actually what we needed. And so when you started to talk to then our other industry, which was like the entertainment industry, and ask them about AI, and people who had great filmmakers who were starting to play with Sora and whatever else, they would say, this is interesting, but it's not useful for how I would make a movie. I actually don't need something to just give me a video out of a text prompt. And so what we've always set out to do is like, how do you take away that form factor of a text prompt to a video, extract the technology, put it in existing workflows, and make sure that it's always driven by an artist. So we drive things with original, whether it's an animation, it's like original art, scripts. It always needs to be driven by that kind of a human. And I think that if you look at kind of where the future goes, it goes towards full automation probably, but I don't think that's what people are asking for, and I don't think that that's what consumers want, and certainly that's not what we're building towards. But we think about it all the time. It's a great question.
Yeah, I think it's
But what,
also when it gets down to some of the practicality of filmmaking, as you as a filmmaker have to, balance budget and creativity, right? So when you look at some of the very obvious kind of first steps that make a lot of sense to a lot of people, regardless of where they fit on the creative spectrum, is if you need to do a huge crowd scene, right?
Mm,
And or a big battle scene or giant
mm,
aerial scenes or giant stunts and explosions and things, and you have to budget for that, right? So you'd budget that
mm.
either practically or you'd budget that in a combination of practical and VFX, and that takes up a large part of your budget in a big movie, right? Now you have a third choice. You can look at it as totally synthetic media. You can look at creating a Civil War crowd scene by prompting those, and still there's an artist that's going to massage that and going to work that so that it fits within the style of what you want to create. But it gives you another lever to pull. I mean, technology always just gives you another lever to pull. Ethically, there's always a little ethical buzz on that lever, right? It's like, whereas when I pull this lever, I'm going to make some ethical choices. I'm going to change people's work dynamics. So it's interesting for you because you're in it, like you're figuring this out. How often and how hard do you feel that ethical lever? Like you're making changes. Things will no doubt cost less money to do certain things. Like we saw it with physical helicopters moving to drones, right? As a precursor to like, I can do drone photography, cinematography now for less money. Something changed, but it changed probably for the better for me.
And I'll tell you, one of the things that we've been doing a lot is drones. Using our model to create drone and helicopter shots with just still images that look extraordinary, which is like now the future of even drone stuff, right? Which is, by the way, not everybody has access to a drone, or not everybody can fly a drone, right? Like you might be in a place you can't fly, but you could still create that shot. I would say, let me lay out kind of how we see the world, how I see the world. I think what's coming is, and we already do this now for every one of our productions, every single thing that we make. Like, when you start an independent production in Hollywood, you open a bank account and you start an LLC. So then it's just your checklist. Okay, we're in production. The third thing on our checklist now is create a custom model. So I believe that the future and where we're going is that every production will have a custom model. And that model will be, your like agentic assistant in making stuff. That model will be, you can think about it as like a smart Google Drive meets Chat GPT that can render stuff and create backgrounds, but that is in your fine-tuned world of whatever film or television or the lore of whatever film and television project you're working on. So I really believe that like this model in productions is going to be the way that we're moving towards. And within that, I think what's important is that like you really are defining the parameters for each individual film. So when you're talking about your Civil War movie, you're now like, your model knows what that world is. They know where you're shooting. They know what the costume looks like. They know who the actors are. They know what the weather look. They know what your camera kit is. So if you are generating like, a bunch of extras running in the battlefield, you can not only make sure that they're the exact right people for that shot in the right camera, everything else, but you can control where each of them go through camera retargeting, through motion control, all those other things. So I think that you're seeing that it's like we're moving very rapidly to a place where it is incredibly, the level of control is down to like the pixel. And that's a change that's happened, I would say, in the last like 6 months.
Right. And that metaphor is like the Bible, when every show has a Bible, right? A style guide and a Bible.
Yeah.
Every single
that's a good, Ted. I haven't thought about that before. That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah,
it's an
you're
old
right.
school sort of Hollywood terminology where there's a giant binder that is the Bible.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the clothing,
Jodorowsky's Doom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And you don't break the Bible because the colors of that era of that movie live in this way, and you would mess up the world if you got out of the Bible, right? So it's interesting.
That's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, it's really like I'm going to steal that. Thank you.
Sure.
Bryn, question: how far away do you think is the day where a kid in college or in high school, that's the next Spielberg or Cameron or Peter Jackson, sits with maybe one or two friends in a garage and their Mac Studio Pro, and they make Saving Private Ryan, or they make like the next Star Wars, like a full feature 4K that is amazing. Not like kind of looks okay, but like people's eyeballs are sliding all over their face and there's no continuity, but like holy shit.
1 to 2 years.
1 to 2 years away.
Yeah,
There's
and I'll
there's
tell
a couple
you,
kids in the garage, and they're doing like Saving Private Ryan.
yeah, and I've met a lot of those kids. I just got back from. I'll tell you about one of them. I just got back from Senegal. I was in Senegal visiting a young filmmaker named Hussein Dembel Sow, and he's I say young because he's younger than me. He's 37, and he is a filmmaker. He's been going to film school in Dakar, this great film school in Senegal. I used to live in West Africa when I was in the Peace Corps, so I spent a lot of time in Senegal. And he made a video, fully generated, about Senegalese soldiers in the Second World War, and put it up on YouTube, and it went viral. This is like 6 months ago, 5 months ago, something like that. And it was better than anything else that you've seen that anybody else has made. And that's why it went viral. Because first of all, you hadn't seen this perspective of Senegalese soldiers in the Second World War. You hadn't seen a Senegalese filmmaker tell the stories in that way. I was like rushed home to reach out and find this guy on LinkedIn to say, like, to introduce myself. And when I got home, I opened my computer and he had written me. It was really quite magical, actually. And he said, "Hey, I'm a big fan of Asteria, and check out this film I just made." And I said, "Are you kidding me? I just was about to write to you." And we developed a friendship. And I went out to see him. We spent 10 days in Senegal working on his next film that he's directing. And that I just, he was on French news 3 days ago where they called him the Spielberg of Africa.
Mhm.
And, that is the future of cinema. That's Hussein is one story amongst many, many stories that are happening all over the world now, from Puerto Rico to Bangladesh to India and beyond. And I think that you're going to see more and more of these sort of collaborations at the beginning between people who are figuring something out. He's figured something out. And then what happens when you start seeing collaborations with filmmakers, and you're kind of trading and exchanging ideas and helping nurture that. So I think that it's coming.
So for our listeners,
For our readers, what's his name again? So we can get everyone can.
His name is Hussein Dembel Sow. And follow him on LinkedIn and on Instagram, and hopefully the film that we produced and he directed is going to come out soon.
It's interesting. The space you're occupying is interesting because on one hand, you're finding these guys or these artists all over the world who didn't previously have access to the means of production. And now they have a way to compete with studios that used to have, control over media distribution and scarcity because it costs so much money and was so complex technologically. And now a single guy, perhaps someone who's very comfortable and sophisticated about technology, but nonetheless, a single guy can make things that are indistinguishable from their product. And so here's great news, right? That new voices from all over the world are going to be heard. And that those people will find a platform. So that's good. I mean, I'm with you. I would have loved to be in that edit room with him, watching him work. But on the other hand, there's another world that we all grew up in and is all around us, which is the old way of doing things. And the old way of doing things, by the way, there's not a switch that gets thrown, right? And there's a new way of doing things, and the old way of doing things suddenly disappears. One fades out, the other one ramps up slowly. And, in 10 years or 20 years, it's completely different. But as we go along, it seems relatively the same, but the proportions are changing. So there's tremendous hysteria in Hollywood, where we both live, Bryn, about what's happening to the business. First of all, because it's so expensive to make films. Second of all, particularly in Hollywood, and into this very fraught situation comes generative AI. And so it's interesting because you're in the middle of the hysteria. On one hand, you're kind of trying to keep making films in traditional ways with new tools, which is an incremental change and shouldn't scare anyone because, as we've said, we've gone through that many times before. The transition from hand-drawn animation to computer animation led to there being a new golden age of animation and more animated films than ever. But I'm not so sure that AI is going to have the same effect.
I think
we will have more voices. But the traditional media business is going to be affected in dramatic ways, particularly in Hollywood.
I think part of that is really part of what we do, and you've been to the studio, so you've seen it, and please guys come by and see it too. Part of what we have at our, I mean, we're built in
a fun place.
We've got a great, team of 40 people on the creative side who work out of this.
Wait, let's also say this is the old Senate studio in the middle of Hollywood.
Yeah.
So it's a really cool place just to be.
Wow.
It's like the oldest or second oldest still operating soundstage in the country. They made 11 Charlie Chaplin movies there, and that building feels like it looks like exactly how it looked, when it was first built. And part of the reason why I wanted to be there is because it's even a subconscious reminder that our industry has gone through a lot of changes, and we made it out the other side, arguably stronger on these things. So, that place was a silent film to sound, color, to digital, all the things, right? And the company has got 40 of us on the creative side. Then there's an additional 60 people on the research side, which is on the Moon Valley side, who are working on the models. But your point about kind of this change, I think, is part of what we do. It's almost like a teaching hospital when directors come through, or filmmakers or VFX people come through. By the way, even the most anti-AI who walk in, who are like, I hate AI, but I'm here, Bryn, because I'm curious and I'm your friend. Like 10 minutes into seeing what we're doing and how we're doing it, they're like, let's go. I can see that this would have solved this problem or that problem. Or like the more revolutionary ones are like, let's seize the means of production and go go make our own movies in this way. Because what we're not doing is just text prompt to movie. And I think that you have to kind of deconstruct what you've seen before. And a lot of that is what people have seen on the internet, which isn't the greatest stuff before. It's like people making kind of little clips and putting them together. And it's like, that's not a film, but then yet it gets all this press that it's like Hollywood is over and all those other things. I mean, we really are thinking about how this technology fits into existing workflows and even existing teams. I believe that people who have something to say, art departments, creative directors, like cinematographers, writers, it's like a golden age and kind of a renaissance for those people who are leaning in this way. And what we're, I think, trying to do at the core is say, look, our industry should know what is bad about AI, which is a lot of things. And we should know what is helpful for us. And we want to be part of that and working with the guilds as well to help them say like, hey, let us help you kind of like navigate through this thing, because there are things that are helpful for us. And there are things that are going to make our jobs easier to do or faster or cheaper. But there are also things that are going to be dangerous for us. And so, that's where we think about copyright, for instance. And that's where, like, when I started going on the road to talk to everybody in our industry, when people would say that hysteria and say like, I hate AI, I would say, but why? Tell me what, not because I was trying to challenge that, but because I was actually asking, what is it about AI that's problematic for you? And then they would say, well, I don't like that it was trained on my scripts. Okay, well, we don't like that either. That's why we've been building a model that's trained only on stuff that we paid to license. Or they might say, well, I think it's going to replace all of us. And then we say, well, there is going to be these changes that happen. But if you're building things with artists and that's meant to empower them and have smaller teams be able to do more, then that's like how we think is going to be the right approach to that, right? So it's like, I think we have to be very realistic about what the challenges are and also what the opportunities are.
And is there a line? It's interesting to hear, all of those talking points are fascinating to me. Is there a line on the actual creative inspiration that you draw in terms of where does the idea come from? Can the idea come from a synthesis of human plus technology? Can you take a kernel of an idea, plug it into an AI, let the AI take a first crack at what a script output would be, or do you go on the wrong, because I think there's an argument on each side of that as to how creativity happens. That's the interesting part of this ethical kind of yolk of the egg, right?
Yeah, I think that the more that and one of the reasons, this goes back to my AI therapist, that I don't mind sharing everything about me, is because I think that when that relationship becomes that the more that you're working together and the more that they know about your style, that then those things become like a really good brainstorm partner. So I think that line is up to all of us to sort of feel out in that way.
Yeah,
like, look, I think if you're a writer and you're asking it to write like chapters of your book or something, like that's up to you. I think that's like sort of, we're getting into some very sort of like, that's dangerous territory. But I think if you're using it to say like, hey, what are some, like research or brainstorm or those kind of things? Like, I think that is useful. But when people get into this place where they're like, okay, they see a world where they say to an AI, like, okay, I want to make 100 Bluey episodes, but it's not Bluey, it's a cat, and upload them on YouTube and make them for me. That's like the world we want to avoid. And that's where I think that we really need filmmakers and artists who are there trying to fight the good fight so that doesn't become that. I think that the AI, go ahead, Charlie.
No, I was just going to ask. So let's take a situation. I just, because I think this is consistent with what you were saying a minute ago about it's possible for an individual like the gentleman in Senegal to make a whole film. So do you think that there could be a director, maybe a director, a cinematographer, a writer, a small team sits together in a room and basically talks a movie into existence? Maybe that, they have a script, they have some characters. Can that happen? Can they spend a couple of weeks doing that?
I think it can happen, but I think the question is, does anybody want that? Like, here's where I think it's important to think about. Natasha and I one time met a AI research guy, mathematician guy. And Natasha asked this question to him, which was struck with us as we started to build this company. This about a year and a half ago. Natasha asked, how come when you look at a piece of AI generated art, it looks weird? How come you can see that it's like AI generated? And this research person, who was not an artist, had this answer that was striking, which he said, I think that, he said, when I look at a piece of art like Picasso's Guernica as a mathematician, I think about how long it took, how many hours it took to paint that, and how much time it took. And Natasha and I never thought about time and art being in this way. Artists don't think about it this way. He thought about it in this way. And he said, so I think that in a subconscious level, you look at a piece of AI art and it doesn't, and you feel that even subconsciously that there's no blood on the page, like there's no sacrifice. Somebody could just make 100 Mona Lisas, but there is not like toil behind it. There's not sweat. And I think that was like really striking for us to start thinking about that. Like, it is really important that you can feel that somebody made a sacrifice. Somebody chose to paint the Mona Lisa instead of painting another thing, or instead of going and spending time with their family or going outside or hanging out with their friends. They made that choice. You can feel that in Dostoevsky, or you can feel that in Tolstoy. And like, that part is the like, that's the artist's kind of way. And I think that expression is like part of what makes it so beautiful to stand in front of a piece of art. Now, what I think is the opportunity is maybe it doesn't have to be that hard. Like, maybe you don't have to actually like die for your piece of art every time, right? Maybe you could take some of that time back. And what would you do with that time back? Well, in Natasha's case, she wants to go make more films because she has more stories to tell. Some people might want to just go outside or sleep in a little bit more. But I think that there's like this a thing that I think you feel that is so important, which is like the human touch and the human agency in something. I think about chess, right? Which is like, people like to watch a human play against a robot. It's like a great battle, or a human play against a human, but nobody's watching two robots play chess against each other, or nobody's watching just robots play video games. It's like, there's no stakes.
Yeah, you bring up like, that's a thread we could pull on for a long time, because you bring up really, really interesting points about the human experience as it relates to technological change, right? And there's a couple things that you would probably resonate with. The most people have an unawareness of how the concept of writing, both fictions, novels, and screenplays, changed once the word processor became a thing. It became easier to actually write and change things. You could erase things without using whiteout. You did the pain thread of writing things changed, right? And then there was a moment in our career, in our lifetime, in my mid-60s, when computer editing started to become a thing, right? And before computer editing, if you were working on a film, you had to make physical cuts on the physical negative, right? Or the that you made. And every cut was very precious. This concept of what we termed the MTV style of quick cut editing was a concept of the 70s and the 80s that changed the way that we watch visuals and create visuals, right? So you refer to this little sort of moment in time of like this early AI visual stuff. We called it plasticity. Like, it had a certain plasticness to it that didn't look real and organic. And just a couple of years later, the technologists figured out how to make things look more organic, more real, more painful to create. So we're in a very interesting time now in the mid 2020s, but this has been happening for a long time, and it has very subtle effects at first, but then it has dramatic effects. So, think of the last time you actually tried to edit something on physical film, right? And how much changed.
I would say, Ted, that's fascinating. I want to spend a lot more time pulling at that thread and thinking about that because I later, not now, because I could talk about it forever, but it would be really interesting. I'm going to spend more time thinking about what happened in those moments. Like what happened what was the effect of the art when it was easier to edit, like, right. Yeah. And, or both a book and that's just so interesting.
And the amount of creationism that happens because the tools get easier, right? The tools get.
Yeah. I mean, like for one, I think that what's fascinated me always and what's been exciting to me in my career is owed to it is these times that technology has, democratized who gets to do this stuff. Like the laptop making, SoundCloud rappers, you can make a record on your laptop. You don't need to go to the Columbia Records, right? Or for me, like when I was in film school, I could never make a movie that looked as good as something you could see on the big screen. But then when the Canon 5D came out and you could put a cinema lens on it, all of a sudden I could afford a camera. And then that's when, my first film that I made with David, who I was in Senegal with, that was nominated for an Oscar, we shot on GoPros and like a flip camera. And like, it was literally because this technology was able to be in my hands, I could afford to do it. I owe my career. It was the democratization at that point of indie film and documentary. And now we sit at this time where like AI has the potential to democratize studio level productions, meaning things that you can only make right now at a studio because they're so prohibitively expensive, you can now be able to make with smaller teams. I'm not trying to make them for zero with one guy in the basement, although I think that is going to be possible. What I'm trying to do is be like, if a film that would have cost, maybe Natasha's film would have cost $80 million at the studio, could we make it for 15 and still have the actors that she wants, the cinematographers that she wants, the art department that she wants? But what you're doing is you're really just having like smaller teams that do that. And I would say that, Ted, to your point about like crowds, where we're seeing a lot of the big savings and the real interest, especially for tentpole films as we work with the studios, is directors who see AI and what this technology can do as a way that they can get closer to the creative and it doesn't pull them further apart. And so what I mean by that is directors who they love their head of VFX and they love their art department. And to be able to say, guys, I just want to sit in a table with 5 people and a computer and be able to go through and iterate and do previs and development and brainstorm with just this team. I don't want to have to go in and present to 100 people at a VFX company and then come back 3 weeks later and come back. What if we could just sit here? Couldn't we do that? And that's what we're starting to do with the studios. And it's really, really exciting because now you're talking about saving like months and months or even years of time. And if you have more time in development, then you have more time to get it right before you start shooting, and that means that hopefully less reshoots and less stuff that you have to fix in post later.
Bryn, one I know we're going to run out of time soon, but a question for you: the thing I've experienced, which I like the most, I don't know if you've had this experience or the directors that you work with. There's a lot of art you can just make a painting, write a novel on your own. You can write a song with a small band and like take it end to end. Really hard to do that with film.
Yes.
I think one of the things that happens here is you could be an auteur and act as if you have hundreds of people around you, and the thing you want to make is actually happening without having to deal with all the egos and you want this and some art director says no and then some arguing with you and the executive producer is like, we don't have the budget for that. It's like all that goes away and the thing in your head could actually come out. Like, that is not what most people are thinking. They're thinking like AI is doing the work. But the other way around is find directors with a thing in their head and it becomes this ability, like it's like Jimi Hendrix on the guitar. I think you'll have an AI system that what's in his head comes out and you have that control over it. And I think that's going to be very different from the AI does everything. Because when you have a crowd of people working under you, like the above the line and below the line, they don't necessarily make what you really want. And it's like, you have to be a producer and don't have time to shoot this. And that wasn't the take I liked. That goes away.
Yeah. And I it's funny when I was talking to Hussein when I first met him and I was because Hussein also believes this. Like he's a revolutionary when it comes to film. He's like, I'm going to be in control of the. I'm going to make a film in Senegal that's going to be able to take on Hollywood, and I don't need the French to come down and write the scripts like they've been doing for a while. I'm going to do it myself. And I remember when he was writing me that, it was so inspiring, and I was going back and forth. And then he sent some like Stanley Kubrick quote, which said something like, if one person can write a symphony, or one person can write a novel, then shouldn't one person also be able to make a film? And
that's a great quote.
I had never read that before.
I gotta find
that.
And he
Is
said
a
that, and I
great
was just
quote.
like,
Wow.
yeah, and I was like,
Wow.
whoa.
That is.
So anyway,
That's a
I
good
may be
place.
butchering it, but it was.
That's a good place for us to wrap things up. This is a
Oh, guys,
great
I love this.
conversation.
I love this chat.
We could. This is what happens when we have a good guest. It's like that's it. We're done. I mean, so we could.
Well,
go
let's just
on
go
and
meet
on.
at the coffee shop right now.
I
And
know.
we'll finish this
I know.
up for the next 5
but
hours.
I agree with you. I think we're at the beginning of a new golden age of filmmaking, where great storytellers will be able to tell more stories with better production values more quickly than they can today. And it will empower new voices from all over the world that will be able to make attention getting material. So there's a lot of fallout from that, and a lot, as we've said in this talk, that needs to be unpacked. But that's clearly the direction that we're going in, and you have to be optimistic because the business is really struggling right now, just
That's
with
right.
the realities of and the gravity and the expense. So something has to change, and I think AI, is going to be part of that change. So it's great to see a company like yours that really gets the old ways to the new ways, and is trying
thank
to
you.
find
And
a new path.
I think that's how we're inspired every day by, I think, the optimism. I'm of the Ted Sarando school of AI can make things 10% better, not, as Jeffrey Katzenberg says, 90% cheaper. And so I do believe that there's a lot of a renaissance here, but we have to be thoughtful about the way it's done, and we have to be careful, and we have to try to build it in the right way because there are challenges. And so let's also be realistic about those things. So thank you.
Bryn, thank you for coming on. That's our show, everybody, and we'll see you back here next Friday.
Thanks. Good show, everybody. Really interesting.
Thank you, guys.